I'm actually going to put you back in, Gene. Hello and welcome to Forest School and Public Education. I'm Mark McKnight, President and CEO at Reflection Riding, Arboretum and Nature Center. And I'm really excited today to introduce Jean Lamino. Jean is the founder and director at the Wauhatchie School, and I'll let her take it away.
Thanks, Mark. When I first heard about forest kindergarten in Europe about 10 years ago, I was really intrigued with the idea. But it wasn't until I met Diana Meadows at Lookout Lake here in Chattanooga that the idea took root. And we decided to open the first forest kindergarten in the state of Tennessee with 14 students. Then in 2018, thanks to the kind invitation of Mark McKnight at Reflection Riding, we moved our campus, our main campus, to that site, which is a beautiful arboretum and nature center. And we kept our program going at Lookout Lake. Since that time, we've added 2 more locations. So we have a total of 4 with a current enrollment of about 123 students. So really, over the past 5 years, over 300 children ages 2 to 14 have participated in Wauhatchie Forest School. And equally exciting, over 120 teachers have been here for teacher training from the United States and China and Korea, and even one from South Africa. So since the very beginning, however, the dream has been that every child should be able to experience nature-based education. So the first year I worked very closely with Gilbert Elementary School in Walker County, and you're going to learn more about that during our panel discussion. Then the following year, Red Bank Elementary here in Chattanooga. And since that time, dozens of teachers from public schools have been trained, have come to observe, are interested in developing a forest kindergarten program or forest school program in their schools. So this year, with the generous support of Lyndhurst Foundation, Reflection Riding, and Wauhatchie School, are partnering to provide training and experiences for our public schools in surrounding counties to experience forest kindergarten. So I'm really thrilled. This is a dream come true because I want every single child to receive those critical benefits from nature immersion education so that they will be happy, healthy, and successful throughout their lives. So I'd like to introduce our guest today, our keynote speaker. I'm very honored to introduce David Sobel. He's a professor in the education department at Antioch University New England in Keene, New Hampshire. He consults and speaks widely on child development and place-based education with schools, environmental education, organizations, and the National Park Service. And he's authored 8 books, more than 70 articles focused on children and nature for educators, parents, environmentalists, and school administrators in the last 30 years. His published books include Beyond Ecophobia and Place-Based Education, Connecting Classrooms and Communities, Childhood and Nature, Design Principles for Educators, Wild Play, Parenting Adventures in the Great Outdoors, and his most recent book is Nature Preschools and Forest Kindergartens. He was recognized as one of the daring dozen educational leaders in the United States in 2007 by the Edutopia magazine. And personally, David's books have informed and inspired me over the years as a classroom teacher, as a nature center director, and a university professor, and even now more as a forest school director and teacher trainer. In 2017, I had the privilege to meet David and hear him speak in Asheville, North Carolina. His message was just what I needed to hear, and I know you'll feel the same today. Thank you so much, David, for joining us, and we're really excited to hear what you have to share.
Thanks, Jean, and thanks for that generous introduction. I'm going to start screen sharing, so you're not going to see me for much of the time. Let's see if we can do this now. So my topic for today is forest school in public education. Since I can only see what is on my screen, I'm going to be checking in with Mark or Jean. Mark, is my first slide PowerPoint up for everybody?
Hi, David. I don't see it, actually. And I said this in the comments too, but let us know where you're joining from. Looks like we have people from as far away as South Africa and as close as Knoxville and Chattanooga.
So, Jean, can you see my first slide or no?
I don't see it, David.
Okay, so what's the problem here? Let's see.
Okay. Have you hit share screen at the bottom, David?
Yes, I did. And now let's see if we can. You see anything now?
Not yet.
Oh, I do see it now. Here we go.
Now we do. There you go.
Okay. Oh, good.
We were just saying yesterday, I think, that no matter how many times you test these things, it seems like when you go live, there's always something.
Right. So sorry, everybody, for that little technological glitch. I'm going to be talking about forest schools in public education. A lot of my work has been done in New England, so a lot of the images are going to come from New Hampshire, Vermont, that kind of place. But it's what's happening in New England is very similar to what's happening in Tennessee and North Georgia. I've been doing a lot of these events over the last 10 years of running nature-based early childhood conferences. We always start with a song and a poem. And so we usually have an opening circle and song. This is because in lots of Forest Days programs, they often start with a song or a circle. In these social distancing times, I realize that this looks a little anxiety provoking, this circle. But this is what it tends to look like when we do these events. And I'm going to start with a song, and I'm going to do it in a song and response fashion. Though we won't hear you, but we're going to leave a place for you. So here's the song. Excuse me. I'm going to sing one line of this song, and then I'm going to pause so that you can sing it as in a kind of response form. So I like to rise when the sun she rises, and then you'll say, I like to rise when the sun she rises. So I'll leave a pause, and then I'll do one line at a time, and then we'll sing it through all together, perhaps. Excuse me. So here we go. Oh, I like to rise when the sun she rises. Now you sing it. Early in the morning. Now you. I like to hear them small birds singing. There you. Merrily upon their leyland. So hurrah for the life of the country kid. And to ramble in the new mown hay. Now I'm going to sing it all the way through with no stopping, and perhaps you'll sing along wherever you are. It's good to, even if you're not a singer, it's really good to sing with kids. Oh, I like to rise when the sun she rises early in the morning. I like to hear them small birds singing merrily upon their leyland. Hurrah for the life of the country kid, and to ramble in the new mown hay. So thanks to all of you who sang along. So we'll also start with a poem that kind of evokes why we're doing this kind of work with kids in the forest. I'm just going to have to read the poem. You're not going to see the text. But what I'd like you to do is imagine that you're on a walk in the forest with a young child, and you come upon a large oak tree that's towering above you. And so kind of take a deep breath and close your eyes, and then listen to this poem. Question of the day. The feet of squirrels have worn the bark of this oak. On the inner side of branches, the bark's cragginess is darker, almost smooth, where light, neat feet climb for acorns, a mate to escape a fox. I wouldn't have noticed this if my daughter hadn't stopped here to ask me a question, to pitch her resplendent, often inconvenient tent of unrushed being. Dada, she asks, how many days fit inside a tree? I look up to the branches. Silver nicks of light skate up and down strands of web. A junco, a handful of shadow, hops along a branch towards the top of the crown. I repeat, careful to keep my voice straight. How many days fit inside a tree? Yes, she says, yes. I'm blind for a spell, almost afraid, but very close to something. I look at her face. I look at Tomas's face, the face that of all the faces moves me the most. How many days fit inside a tree? I repeat again. That's a very good question. And then I answer. I answer with a final gentle certitude. 1 million. 1 million, she says? Yes, I say. 1 million exactly. So I love that poem for a bunch of reasons. I love his description of her pitching her resplendent and often inconvenient tent of unrushed being. I like the image of unrushed being, and part of what we're doing when we have children outside on in forest, on forest days is trying to provide some of that experience of unrushed being. And I like the fact that she asks an unexpected question. How many days fit inside a tree? And that's the kind of question that we want to come up. We want children to be able to have the time to ask, and that we want to try and figure out appropriate ways to answer. So I'm going to be talking about both the more social and emotional and spiritual aspects of having children outside, how many days fit inside a tree, but also all the academic and kind of executive function development benefits that come from children in forest school settings. So I'm going to start with a little bit of context about childhood and nature in the 21st century. I'm thinking not in context of pandemic terms, but in terms of how it was and how it will be again. But a little background on what's happened sociologically with children these days. So denying children of a chance to encounter nature, no matter how small, robs them of the very essence of life. And yet, concern over crime and children's safety in public space is linked with a decreasing amount of time spent by children outdoors. We know this. And there's lots of reasons for diminishing outdoors playtime. So screen time and structured activities and pandemics and working parents or working guardians and lots of school and homework and fear of injuries. Although it's good to keep in mind that more children are injured falling out of bed than falling out of trees every day. And it's good also to remember that the most dangerous thing we do every day is put children in cars to drive them places. So we do a risk-benefit analysis and assume that putting children in cars is worth the risk. And so we have to have the same mindset about children playing in the woods and risk, some of the risk being beneficial rather than too dangerous to take on. Excuse me for 1 second. So this is a great quote that expresses this kind of parental fear from a parenting magazine article. She says, I want to stand in the front yard and sing out their lovely names, meaning her children's names, at dusk and have them suddenly appear in the damp yard around me like little fireflies, but I can't. I can't let them roam. I don't have my mother's confidence that the world is a safe place. So a certain sense of freedom of fun has gone out of the world. That's certainly true right now. The golden age of childhood is gone. So I'm going to contend that the golden age of childhood isn't gone. It's going, and it's our responsible to prevent the goingness and try and preserve some of the golden age of childhood. So in normal times, and even now, we're seeing much less of that upper right-hand corner image of the boys jumping into the river and lots more of kids on screens. Really true right now. And here's a good illustration of what's happened over 4 generations in a one British family. This is also true in the United States, but this is a nice graphic. So in 1950, in 1919, the great-grandfather, George, aged 8, could travel within that really large area that's outlined by the red dots. So he could walk on his own 6 miles to go fishing. His son, the grandfather Jack, aged 8 in 1950, in the circle on the left center there, could walk about a mile on his own into the woods. Now these distances are a function of parental guidance and rules, as well as kids' disposition. The mother, aged 8 in 1979, could walk to the swimming pool about a half a mile away. And the son, aged 8 now, about 5 years ago, was allowed to walk on his own to the end of his street. So there's been this radical reduction in children's range and children's ability to be out in the landscape exploring. This is true in urban settings as well as rural settings. There's been this persistent constriction of freedom of children to be out in the world exploring. And so, again, what we have is much less of what's there in the upper left-hand corner, child walking on the fallen down tree, and more of kids on leashes, whether they're electronic leashes or literal leashes. And we've also had this, as a function of this removal of the kid from the natural world, this change in the vocabulary or the lexicon for kids. So the second paragraph here on this slide, the latest version of the Oxford Children's Dictionary, words like heron and magpie, otter, willow, and blackberry have been removed, and in their place have been substituted more modern terms, not modern even now, electronic BlackBerry, voicemail, MP3 player, all those things. So the lexicon of childhood is changing, and the nature parts of the lexicon are going away. So one of the responses to that are nature preschools and forest kindergartens, or forest days. So what we're trying to do is replace the experience that kids tended to have more naturalistically in their family settings with programs like forest schools, or 1 day a week in the woods, or afternoons in the woods. And it's happening a lot in kindergartens in New England, and that's what I'm going to focus on first, and then we'll take a break, and then I'm going to show you an example of forest days in a 6th grade classroom in New England as well. So we'll start with some research on the benefits of kids being outside for some chunk of time, at least once a week or every day. This is the cover of my Nature Preschools and Forest Kindergartens book, and part of what the benefit is the obvious joy that this child's face illustrates. So key features of nature preschools and forest kindergartens or forest days in schools. They're using local woodlands and meadows and streams as the setting for some of the learning. There's regular, frequent contact in the same place over significant periods of time in all weathers. So this whole idea of going back to the same place as an outdoor classroom, as a base, and then exploring out from that same consistent place. Provides child-centered freedom that that open-ended wondering time illustrated in that poem that I read. But it also really does, what we're trying to do is accomplish all the cognitive, emotional, social skills that underlay academic growth and develop a benefit of stewardship behavior. I'm going to share a bunch of things. These are all old documents at this point, but a lot of things that I'm sharing are in these documents, and there's a variety of newer ones as well. So exercise in preschool children. Research, and I'm not going to read all the content on these slides. It's there if you want to browse it. I'm going to summarize little bits of it. Researchers in Seattle found that most preschoolers get 48 minutes of exercise a day, and they should be getting 2 hours a day. And we also know that the childhood obesity rate has risen fairly significantly over the last couple of decades. And there's a direct correlation between how physically active kids are and obesity problems. Increased physical activity leads to better health. It's kind of a duh kind of understanding. But it was interesting in a Canadian study that Ontario preschoolers, when they're outside, they're twice as active as when they play indoors. So just having kids outdoors implicitly means that they're going to be more physically active. The Swedish study compared children that played in a natural forest area 1 to 2 hours per day compared with children that played on a typical playground for the same amount of time. And the motor development of the group that played in the natural area improved significantly more over a 9-month period than the kids that played on the playground. So the virtue of children being in a wooded landscape or a meadow landscape, being outside in a natural landscape, more physical activity than on a playground. Same kind of thing was found in a study in British Columbia about 5 years ago. And this was a program that was similar to what's happening in a lot of the schools in the Chattanooga, North Georgia area, half day a week in kindergartens in the woods. In addition, contact with nature increases mental well-being. Children with nature near their homes are more resistant to stress, have lower incidence of behavior disorders and anxiety and depression. So it would also follow that children with nature near their schools and time to spend nature in their schools are going to show lower incidences of behavioral disorders, anxiety, and depression. And symptoms of children with attention deficit disorder are relieved after contact with nature. And some physicians are now actually prescribing nature time as one of the aspects of treatment in addition to drugs to treat attention deficit disorder. And particularly appropriate right now, being outdoors decreases illness. And this was a Scandinavian study, looked at motor fitness, but also showed that children in nature kindergarten settings or forest school settings were less likely to get sick than kids in comparable indoor settings. And this may be an important consideration going forward in post-pandemic opening up of schools. In Scotland right now, there's interest by the Scottish education authorities to consider that, maybe when we go back to school, we should have children outside for bigger chunks of the day, in one part to decrease virus transmission. Nature play supports language development. There's a higher prevalence of imaginative play and creative play outdoors that fosters language and collaboration skills. Okay, so we've talked about some of the benefits. Let's look at what it looks like in play-based early childhood programs in natural settings. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. This is a great picture from a nature preschool in Midland, Michigan, the Chippewa Nature Preschool. And so, you know, what's going on out there when kids are playing in the woods or learning in the woods? And this continuum is a good articulation of what we want to aspire to. So on one end of the curriculum, on one end of the continuum is laissez-faire, loosely structured classrooms. And this refers both to indoor and outdoor settings. So lots of play, but it can sometimes be chaotic. On the other end of the continuum, you've got the didactic, highly structured classroom with completely teacher-led instruction and hardly any child-initiated learning. And research suggests that neither of these ends of the continuum is beneficial, but instead what you really want are these kinds of learning that are in the middle here. The classroom rich in child-initiated play, or the playful classroom with focused learning. So let me give you a for instance of how this works. So this is from a school in Richmond, Virginia that started to do you know, 1 day a week in the woods or a couple of afternoons in the woods with their young kids. And this is kindergarten and first graders. And in this woodsy area near the school, there was a lot of child exploration and play around this one fallen tree. And there were two groups of kids. On one end of the tree by this old stump, there was deconstruction going on. They were trying to loose the trunk from its main support. So they were trying to get the trunk of the tree to fall off of that stump. At the other end of the tree, they were mostly doing fabrication. There was a chocolate factory going on. They were making chocolate from the pine, deteriorated pine wood, and they were creating a history museum of little pieces of interesting shapes that they found in the forest soil and in the duff. And so these two groups were kind of separate for a while. But one of the things that the kids at the fabrication end liked doing was walking on the trunk of the tree or sitting on the trunk of the tree. And some of the fabrication kids thought, well, that's not going to work if the kids at the other end of the tree knock the trunk of the tree off of the stump. So Stella said, trying to discourage the kids from deconstructing, said, people come down here just for this tree. It's a special tree. People like climbing on this tree. And Luke, who was one of the deconstructors, said, you could always climb on other things and make another climbing tree. So there started to be this natural resource controversy over how we're going to use this tree. So they reached the, I'm going to go back for a second. So they reached the solution that as long as somebody was on the tree or walking on the tree, the deconstructor kids wouldn't try to deconstruct. So then Reese decides to initiate a nonviolent sit-in. He realizes that if he sits on the tree, then the kids can't do the deconstruction. And so this leads to the teachers realizing that this is a great opportunity for having a debate about this, how we're going to use the tree. So back inside the classroom, teachers are asking the kids the pro and con for both kinds of activities. And the deconstruction kids are saying, persistence is good, like in the Iliad, defending their wanting to keep working on knocking the tree off the stump. And this is, of course, what we want is for kindergarten kids to be referring to classic literature. And Drew says, it's going to be fun to watch when it falls. It'll make a big cloud of dirt. Against deconstruction, Nora is saying, leave nature alone. It's part of the forest and animal habitat. It'll squish us if it falls. And Annie says it'll be a problem for kids that can't climb on it. So the teachers are using the play opportunity to develop the opportunity for the kids to articulate arguments and debate. So look at one of the Common Core key points in writing. the ability to write logical arguments based on substantive claims, sound reasoning, and relevant evidence is a cornerstone of the writing standards. And so my contention is what the teachers are doing is developing the capacity to be able to do this kind of argumentation of logical arguments. So the skills being developed are they're learning to take a stand and argue for what they believe in. They're using literature and history to support their arguments. They're recruiting others to help support their positions. And they're recognizing that nonviolent action can be a method for making a point. So what started as child-directed play got recruited into teacher-directed learning about how to construct a good argument. Here's a similar kind of experience that comes out of the same phenomenon. This is kids in Maine playing in the woods where there's a similar fallen down pine tree with chocolate. So I've seen chocolate emerge in many different places in the country as a description of what the pine wood is like when it's deteriorated into this kind of mushy, sawdusty stuff. So the kids at this Maine school had developed a bakery outside that was, and they had made recipes for a whole diversity of different kinds of baked goods. And they created a bake shop. And there was, on top of the pine log, there was a little shop with shelves set up that had vanilla pudding and chocolate cake and nut bread and a diversity of baked things. So one of the things was nut bread. And so the teachers had the kids write the recipes of the materials that they use to make the different baked products. So again, starts in play, becomes academics. So in this case, the nut bread was made with half a cup of wood chips, 2 cups of mud, 4 tablespoons of sawdust, and then the baking instructions. The teacher said, let's translate this into cooking lessons. So she worked with a local bakery. The baker took the kids' recipes and came up with real recipes for the same kind of product. The kids then had to follow those recipes. So lots of good reading and math here. Had to follow those recipes, make their product, and then host a tea party for their parents. So you can see all the great math and literacy aspects in having to follow the recipe and into having to follow the baking instructions for the nut bread. So what's happened in both of those examples is that something that started on the left hand of that continuum, the laissez-faire, open-ended play part of the curriculum, got drawn into the center of the continuum. So it became more of a playful classroom with focused learning where teachers were guided learning with rich experiential activities like doing the baking activity. So let me, since the nature kindergarten or forest school stuff is within the context of the broader movement towards play-based early childhood programming, I just want to share a little bit of research with you on what we know about play-based early childhood. Now, this is not specifically forest school or nature school, but just play-based early childhood programming. This is a classic study done by the High Scope Foundation folks, where they compared classes of kids where preschool kids had 21% free play, and then another class that had mostly direct instruction and only 2% of free play. And when tested at age 15, children in the latter class, the no free play class, were significantly more likely than the other classes to experience misconduct, less likely to participate in sports or contribute to their family or community. And at 23, more work suspensions and arrests. And so I say if forest school or play-based kindergarten is leading to lower arrest rates, that's a really good thing. Similarly, there was a big study in Germany when a lot of play-based kindergartens switched to focusing more on cognitive achievement, as similar to what's happened in the United States. And so the researchers compared 50 play-based classes with 50 early learning centers, which was more academically focused, and then found that by age 10, the children who had played in kindergarten excelled over the others in many ways, more advanced in reading and math, and better adjusted socially and emotionally in school. And so as a result, German kindergartens returned back to being more play-based again, and there are now, according to the most recent thing I read, 2,000 forest kindergarten programs in Germany. Another Norwegian study did the same thing, that looked at 500 kids in 28 different daycare centers with different amounts of time outside. And as the amount of time outside went up, the children showed better performance on math skills tests and fewer symptoms of attention deficit disorder. And this is an important point here, is that what a lot of early childhood folks have been saying is that the development of executive function skills, being able to control your behavior, being able to rule shift, those kinds of, the development of executive function skills is a better predictor of long-term academic success than early literacy and math skills. And so these kinds of studies are suggesting that if you develop executive function skills, which are, and there's lots of opportunities for that in the outdoor setting, then that's a better goal with preschool and kindergarten kids than this early reading and math stuff, even though that stuff can also be addressed. I'm going to show you some research on and examples from a Forest Days program that's happening in a lot of Vermont kindergartens. This is a beautiful book on how to implement a Forest Day program. It's published by Antioch, where I work, and Green Writers Press. It's currently out of print. We're awaiting a second printing, but very useful to get if you're doing this with your kids. Very hands-on, explicitly useful for teachers. And it includes this study of 3 different Forest Days program in 3 different Vermont public elementary schools. It started by this teacher who's on the right-hand side there, named Eliza Minucci, doing 1 day a week in the woods. And this was pretty much 1 full day a week in the woods. So 4 full days of normal indoors kindergarten, though that changed as it went along to being more outdoors time, but 1 full day a week in the woods. And this is what their schedule looked like. I'm not going to read all of this, but you know, entering the woods, going down a very steep descent with that needed a rope handlebar to get down there, gathering around the fire pit, sit spots, children being in the woods at 10 o'clock, children doing sit spots, sitting on their own, just observing quietly, then gathering around the fire, and then after the fire, they had child-directed nature play. In other words, this is kids' free time. That was followed by a lesson that was much more teacher-directed at 11:30. And these were kind of explicit, either cooking lessons or math or writing or science activities. Lunch around the fire, back to the classroom, and then the last hour of the day spent writing in journals. So a really nice balance of teacher-directed and kid-directed activities in the course of these 1 days. When we had an evaluator go and talk to parents, administrators, teachers at these 3 different sites, here were the recurrent themes. There was a mastery of academic skills. So all the reading and math skills that were expected in kindergarten were being developed, even though 1 day a week didn't look like conventional indoors kindergarten. There was enhanced student enthusiasm for school. Here's a for instance of a parent comment. I want them to like school and build that habit and expectation of I'm going to school because I like it, not I'm going to school and they're going to force me to sit at a desk all day. Having this opportunity to just go out and be 5 is huge for my son. There's so much literature on this whole notion of whether kindergarten is in its academic form is really appropriate for 5-year-old boys or not. Teachers, administrators reported fewer discipline and behavior issues. This is happening across the board. That doesn't mean no discipline and behavior issues, but means fewer ones. And teachers comment on the improved social connectivity for students and teachers. So many teachers say, you know, it just gave me a way to interact with kids that in the classroom I'm always having trouble with or just can't communicate with. Outside, it just works way differently. Here's one teacher's comment. Their level of focus and concentration improves given a greater level of choice and motivation. One girl comes to mind. For her to sit in the classroom for 3 minutes is impossible, but at the sit spot in the woods, she's fine for 10 minutes. Also, interesting research on children's capacity to attend to teacher-directed lessons after they've been outside doing some outdoor learning. So outdoor learning can bring greater focus and attention to indoor learning. And then the last 2 things found healthy physical development. We talked about a lot of the research on that in kids, kids that couldn't walk across the playground, able to go on long walks of 1 mile or 2 by the end of the year. And then these great opportunities for teamwork and problem solving skills. And in that lower right-hand picture, I hope you can see that is that what the kids have made there is an American flag. So this is good American education. So here's the summary of that. This is a parent comment. The program's probably the best educational thing that has ever happened to my child. He receives all the standard kindergarten education, but it's greatly enhanced by all his experiences, both in the woods and in preparation for and discussion of their time outdoors. And the image is a discussion that happened back inside. I can't remember whether it was before going out or after being out, but all the different things that the kids knew about snow. Okay, so Mark, I want to take a break for a second since I've been talking for a while, and I want to get a couple of questions from some participants before I do this latter part.
Absolutely. We've had some good questions on here. First off, thanks everybody for joining. It looks like we had about 114 people watching here live, which is awesome. I had a couple. One was about older children, and I think you're going to get to that later.
Yeah.
You want to
let's hold off on that one because I'm about to show 6th grade 1 day a week in the woods kind of thing, and it looks there's some elements that are similar, but there's a lot of much more academic content.
Okay, perfect. So Katie, we'll get to that in just a minute. Let's see what else we have here. How about this one? How would you do a play-based kindergarten within a multi-grade room?
Oh, that's a good question. Nobody's asked me that question yet. There are lots of, in the Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine classrooms where this is happening, there's been a lot of movement up from kindergarten into 1st and 2nd grade classrooms. So kindergarten teachers and parents have their kids see what their kids are getting out of it in kindergarten, and then they advocate for it to start working in 1st and 2nd grade classrooms. And so 1st and 2nd grade classroom teachers have been starting to do it. And in some cases, a kindergarten and a 1st grade classroom will pair up and both be outside at the same time. I would basically do the same format as described in that slide. And I would just have the child-directed nature play kind of things, I think that would be pretty similar. When I got to the teacher-directed activities, I would do the differentiated activities, assuming that you have enough different adults there. I would have, a kindergarten academic activity and a first grade activity and a second grade activity. And when you also have a multi-age classroom, obviously you can, you've got kids that are second graders but are really more at a first grade reading level, and so you can group them up that way. So I would do it essentially the same way, but just with more differentiation during the academic pieces of the forest school time. How about another question, Mark?
Awesome. So this one, I don't know if this will be in anybody's expertise here, but we had a request for another webinar about a desert school, which would be really fun.
Yeah, there's a bunch of this going on in Arizona and New Mexico right now, and there is a great school called the Star School. So for the person who asked that question, look up the Star School in near Flagstaff, Arizona, which is a mostly Native American school. It's mostly Navajo kids and some Hopi kids, and it's located in the desert, and their curriculum is completely place-based across the grades. I think it's K-5 or preschool through 5. And so a lot of the same principles that we're talking about are being executed there. They're out in the desert doing nature play and academic learning.
That's great. Well, I have a couple questions about doing this type of experience if you're not near a wooded area or if you're in an urban area. Yeah.
So let's have this be the last one, and then I'll do the upper grades piece, Mark. Yeah, we've worked a lot in urban schools in Boston, New Haven, Providence, and urban sites in New England, and also there's a school in Victor, Idaho, that does a one-day-a-week program, and they bus the kids. Even though Victor, Idaho seems like it would be the perfect place to do this, they don't have an outdoor play or forested open area, so they bus the kids one day a week to a site. So that's happening in a lot of places where there's not an adjacent area to the school, and they've worked out the opportunity to bus the kids to a place that they go to recurrently on a weekly basis. In urban settings, it's hard to find a place where there isn't a walkable to park or natural area nearby. And so in the schools in Boston that we were working on, they were using Arboretum or the Franklin Park Zoo or the cemetery, the cemetery in Boston. There's a Brooklyn school that goes to a park one day a week and to the shore another day a week. There's a school in the upper part of Manhattan located near Central Park, and they do 2 afternoons a week in Central Park. So it's really a question of finding the nearby natural areas, which in the majority of cases are there, and hitching up with nature centers or park departments is one of the ways to accomplish that.
Thanks, David. And actually that one really cues up a thank you that I need to make right now, which is the Lyndhurst Foundation here in Chattanooga has actually made this possible and has also funded a public forest school site on our campus here at Reflection Riding, Arboretum and Nature Center. So one of the things that I would encourage anybody to do who's asking a question about how to do this in an urban area or how to drive more public school interest in this, I'd say work with your local Arboretum, Nature Center, see if you can find a place to be able to do this. And with that, I think we'll turn it over, David, back to your screen and talk a little bit about higher level or older kids and do past the kindergarten.
So let's see if I go back up. Okay, So is the 1 day a week in the woods with Vermont sixth graders on the screen?
Yep, we got it.
Okay. So full disclosure, this is actually my wife's sixth grade classroom. She's there in the green raincoat in the middle.
That's great.
They don't have a really suitable place near their school. This is a school in Guilford, Vermont, a town of about 2,000 kids, small elementary school, preschool, a nature preschool through sixth grade, one classroom per grade. Her class, I think in this year that we were looking at, only had about 15 kids in it, but her classrooms range from 15 up to 20 or 22 kids. They don't have a great place adjacent to their schoolyard for the sixth graders, so they walk a mile to the Weeks Forest, which is a piece of conservation land, and they're walking along the trail there. I'm going to zip through this pretty quickly so that we have enough time for the panel towards the end. So Fridays, actually not always Fridays, but this year I think it was Forest Fridays. Walk to the Weeks Forest, spend 2/3 of the day there, walk back to school, spend the last hour at school. Here are some of the kids. A few of the kids missing that day. You'll notice they have mud on their faces. I'll get to that in a second. So same kind of format. They walk to the woods. They gather around, gather in a circle. They talk about what they're going to do that day. It's often a combination of free play. In the beginning, my wife said, you know, I thought we were going to go out there and measure the stream velocity and measure the girth of trees and figure out how much wood there was in trees. And she said, I realized that sixth graders need to play in the woods as well. And so part of it was play and kind of primitive learning skills as well as academics. And so we'll see both of those. But one of the academic pieces was that they would always journal. And then they early on started to learn what kind of mammals lived in the Weeks Forest. This was in preparation for them choosing a totemic animal. They didn't all choose mammals, but they did research on what actually is in this forest that we're in every Friday. Part of what happens is that my wife tells a story about this group of people that discover this forest, and there are different clans, and each clan has a totemic animal that they choose, and each clan has to build a fort that's big enough for the clan to be in, and then there's lots of activities related to the fort construction and survival. This is the Deer Mouse clan. This is the Northern Saw-Whet Owl clan. So she encourages the kids to go beyond the kind of common animals like hawks and deer and bear and coyotes, and get down to these lesser known interesting creatures. And the Turkey Vulture clan. These were the bad kids, and there was a big debate for this group whether they were going to be the Turkey clan, the Wild Turkey clan, or the Turkey Vulture clan, but the Turkey Vultures won out. They spent a lot of time in guided activities looking for signs of animal life. This was the source of the reason for why the Deer Mouse clan got chosen, because this was a group of kids watching a mother deer mouse carry a bunch of newly born baby mice from one location to another. So since they had that experience, they became the Deer Mice clan. There was a dad of one of the kids who was a big game hunter, so he came in and set up a trail cam out in the area where the kids were spending time so they could see the kind of wildlife that was there when they weren't there. So it's a nice picture of a white-tailed deer. And they then, once they started to understand what all the different creatures that were there were, they started to work on understanding food chains. And the idea being that they were going to construct food chains that were specific to these biomes in this kind of hemlock forest biome along a stream in southern Vermont. They were also reading a book called My Side of the Mountain, which a 12-year-old boy, 6th grade age, goes out to live in the woods on his grandfather's land for a winter or a year. And so on the left-hand columns there, the plants and animals are the plants and animals that are identified and used in this literature, My Side of the Mountains. And then on the right-hand side there are the plants and animals in gill forts, which is the area that they call their fort area in the Weeks Forest. So this nice relationship of their experience to text experience. And then here's the kind of writing that was emerging about the food chains. The sun spreads through the woods, releasing growth and life as a deer mouse scatters across the forest floor. The brave mouse tumbles through some horsetails found along the trail in the forest, scavenging for a meal. The mouse hears a small sound. He quickly races to the noise to find a caterpillar crawling down the stem of a Christmas fern, another specific plant. He quickly snaps it into his tiny mouth. He crunches the little bug under his jaws, unaware of the caterpillar's pain. Full and satisfied, he trots away to his family's den to sleep. Not too far away, a coyote wakes up. So we know what's going to happen there. Here's some of the vocabulary that was being woven into the kids' writing. So an intentional attempt to address the science curriculum components that were part of the 6th grade curriculum in the work that they're doing in the forest. Then they did this big piece that's going to become a beautiful final project of learning the plants and flowers in the forest. So in the beginning, the kids were using their cell phones to take pictures of all the different common plants. So puffballs, some asters, some clover. And then they did a plot study. An environmental educator from a local environmental center came in and they each did meter plot studies. So they plotted out a meter square and identified as many things as they could find in that meter square. From that came an understanding of what the most common plants were. I think there were 15 common plants because there were 15 kids in the classroom. And then each kid becomes a plant expert on one plant. So this is the worksheet that they're going to document the appearance, the habitat, how it reproduces. Here's one of the students. His name was Hunter. His plant is false Solomon seal. So he's looking at the plant so he can start to do his first sketch of the plant. There's also an activity of the map that they're using was a project from a previous year that they worked with the Conservation Commission to develop this trail guide to the Weeks Forest. So the kids are using the trail guide and they're locating where their plant is found in this along the trail and in the forest. And then back in the classroom, they make a map using plant materials to show where the different plants exist in the forest. So they're starting to learn not just plant identification, but plant distribution as a function of soil quality and sun availability. They start with sketches of their plants. I think this is hop hornbeam, but I'm not sure. And then this is something that good educators are doing well, is they're using local resources to enhance the curriculum. So this woman's a local bookmaker, and so she's going to guide the kids through the making of a florilegium, basically a flora of the Weeks Forest. So she's showing other books that she's worked on with kids. On the covers, there are going to be little folios of a collection of these plant images. So each kid makes their own folio that's going to be the cover, and they do gold leaf printing on the book covers using ferns and leaves that they've collected. And each kid is going to make one page for this book about their plant. And the page is large, over large in the beginning. So gives lots of space for kids. And the kids have a very specific format. There's a border around the drawing that they have to include. There's an enhanced illustrated first letter of the plant. And then there's text that's going to have to follow a certain format. So there's a nice combination of science and literacy and art. They work with the art teacher to develop color palettes so that they start to get the understanding of the range of different kinds of yellow. You know, lots of yellow, a little bit of green, green and yellow, green only. When the kids were doing this project, she would have a drawing time that was like drawing studio, lower lights, kids off in different corners of the classroom working on their illustrations and writing, quiet piano music, so real kind of studio setting. Here's Hunter towards the end of his illustration. That's the false Solomon seal that he was looking at in the field. And that F there is the first letter of false Solomon seal. Linda shows the kids how to bind their books. So each of the kids binds their own book. So a nice manual artistic skill. And then here are the diversity of pages, and I'll show you a few of them close up. The remarkable thing is there are kids on IEPs and with learning disabilities in this class, and you would not be able to pick out which were those kids. This is the cover, not done by a sixth grader, but done by my wife, who's a good artist. And you can see the three animals, the deer mouse, the saw-whet owl, and the turkey vulture there. And then here's some of the pages. And the writing all followed the same pattern. American beach trembling in the breeze, the trees' toothed leaves shine in the sun just before it goes down. Sugar maple. The illustrated S is you can see is drips of sugar maple sap dropping off into a maple sap bucket. Here's the Christmas fern. Here's the kids kind of looking at the book. So the images were all taken, reduced, brought back to the kids, and then the kids turned them, sewed them all into their folio books. And then this is the display that went up in the hallway of the school of all the children's work. Actually, let me go back to that for a second. Oops. So I want to make this point again, that what started as and was rooted in what would look like play, fort building, exploration, stream wading, fire building, all that kind of stuff, gradually turned into, that's the open-ended stuff, gradually became more and more shaped into this very academically and artistically scaffolded activity to create these beautiful books. And parents and other teachers would come into the school and say, sixth graders did that? It's impressive work. So the big idea, knowledge without love will not stick, but if love comes first, knowledge is sure to follow. Part of what we have to do here in Forest School is develop the love and comfort in the natural world, and then if there's that foundation, then it's easy to start building knowledge constructs and academic learning out of it. So that's the academic side of it. And then this quote, the other piece that's going on here about stewardship and connection to the natural world. This is a quote from my daughter. She said, "This connection to the earth, which is everywhere and always nurturing, is one of the greatest gifts I've ever received. It allows me to feel at home anywhere that I can plant my feet in the soil and hug the trees, and it helps me to find solitude and peace within myself and the world around me. And so this notion that, yes, we're accomplishing the academic and skills of what we need to be doing in elementary schools, but we're also trying to develop this sense of connectedness with the natural world. So I'm turning it back over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, David. That was awesome. We got a lot of great feedback on, especially on that book, which looks really like a fun activity. We might have to steal that idea for sure. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Jean Lamino. Jean is, as I mentioned, the founder and director of the Waxahachie School, and she is going to introduce our panelists. And I'm going to kind of drop into the background. We have a lot of great panelists on here. And I did a quick poll while you were talking, David, and it sounds like we have a lot of educators on the line here that are watching. And so that was definitely the kind of idea that we had behind this was, and originally this was going to be an in-person conference. Obviously things changed in between. So I really appreciate everybody sticking with us, and David, your willingness to do this in a virtual way.
Thanks so much, David. As I expected, your message didn't disappoint. You hit all the high points. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm really, really honored to welcome our panel today. We are privileged to have the whole Walker County, basically administration and teaching team, who really were the ones who started the first forest kindergarten, we think, in the public school in the U.S. With their everyday program. Damon Raines is the superintendent of Walker County Schools, and he was there from the beginning too, lending his support, and has been continually supportive of the efforts of getting Forest School into his school. We have Matt Harris, who is currently the coordinator of innovation for Walker County, but he was the principal of Gilbert Elementary and was the one who really focused on getting it started in his school. And if you watched videos that were sent ahead of time, you probably already know that story. And I'm really glad that Matt can join us. He's a busy man. Both he and Damon are very busy. We appreciate it. Beth Pelham is the current principal at Gilbert Elementary, and I think that she will have some interesting and important things to share too, as they're continuing to grow their program there, which, by the way, this may come up in the discussion, but they now have 2 forest kindergarten classrooms out of 4, and 2 forest first grades. So that's an exciting development too. Charity Burnett was the first forest kindergarten teacher at Gilbert. So from the very beginning, 2015, she and I worked together quite a bit during those first few years, and we still do. And then Rebecca Cantrell joined the team last 2016. I think that's correct. And they really form the hook, the basis of everything that happens with the forest kindergartens at Gilbert Elementary. So with that introduction, we're anxious to hear more about how you all did what you did and to field questions from our participants. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jean. And just to give everybody a idea of what's going on here, we can have 6 people on the screen at once. So we're doing the kind of Hollywood Squares thing. If you guys on the live stream have questions, please go ahead and ask them. One of the questions that I had a couple different versions of that I think would be worth talking about, and I'm going to turn this one over to Matt. How do you get public school system interested in this kind of concept?
You've got a good superintendent to start with. And I think you start small. We did. We started with the garden, and it just gradually expanded over time. And it just seemed like a logical, to me, it seemed like a logical next step. So it wasn't that we went from 0 to every day, a half day in the very beginning. We'd had extensive outdoor ed for several years. The school kind of had a history of outdoor education, and we just kind of build upon the history of that. And so a lot of it came down to executing prior initiatives. So we, kind of proven that things worked, and then have, Damon from the very beginning said, take a risk, don't work in the box. So he always kind of gave me the opportunity to do that. And, I think a lot of it came down to planning. Having a PhD with Gene Lamino probably helped a lot. I don't think they would have listened it wouldn't have been as easy without having, Gene next to me saying, yeah, this is a real thing. This is something we really do. So I think that definitely made an impact.
Thanks, Matt. So one of the other questions that I had on here is a similar question, but how do you fund it? And I think for that one, I'm going to pose that question for Damon. Is funding something that was an issue at all in Walker County, and how did you handle that?
Well, funding is always an issue in public education, so we'll start there. We definitely had to look at it from an FTE standpoint, but we also, even when we're talking about funding and those weights and measures that we look at, the first question we always ask was, what is going to be best for our students? And a lot of times we're finding, not a lot of times, every time we're finding, when it's best for our kids, we're finding that typically the funding will maximize itself, and we don't have those same issues. There's always going to be things going on, obviously what we're dealing with right now with COVID-19, that's going to impact our budgets. But we always started off with looking at what's best for our kids. And once we do that, then we can begin to look at how we're maximizing them according to the equation that the state gives us. We had no lack of students lining up or being put on waiting lists. Once we got this underway, the families saw the benefit, the teachers saw the benefits. And of course, it does help to have an administrator who's willing to get outside of a box or eliminate the box completely and take that risk, as well as having two amazing teachers who are in there attracting kids and attracting families to that program. And so funding's always going to be an issue. It can't be the obstacle. You have to find ways around that big rock, and we put our heads together and figured out ways to do it.
Great, thanks, Damon. I think I'm going to go to Charity next as one of the first Forest kindergarten teachers. What kinds of concerns did you get from parents, and how did you address concerns?
My very first year, I don't recall having very many concerns. They were eager to join the class. It was the first one in our county, in our state. So I think they were excited about something new that was outside of the normal of a traditional block classroom. Most of the parents that signed up for my class that first year knew what they were, well, all of the parents, they knew what they were getting into. We did some education at first to let them know what Forest Kindergarten was, and we told them about the risk that their students would be taking that would be beneficial for them. And so all of them that year stayed in the program and had success. I guess the only thing was worrying about getting the gear that we needed, which was supplied.
Okay, that's great.
No problem.
Rebecca, because you're in the field as well, I want to ask you some of the questions that we get pretty consistently are about hazards. And here at Reflection Writing, we've talked a lot about the difference between hazards and risks. But have you run into ticks, mosquitoes, snakes, that kind of thing?
So we do teach our children about snakes and about the positive benefits that snakes do have. In our base camp and in Burnett's base camp, we haven't really had a lot of problems with ticks. Mainly it's been mosquitoes. And so before we go out and explore, we spray the kids with bug spray. So yeah, we haven't really had a lot of problems with that.
Okay. Good. Well, keep posting your comments. We've had I got another funding comment. I don't know if that came in after we had already talked about it, but definitely one of the main things is actually getting your school system or your location to do this. We had a comment here from Janice Stewart saying, can you explain the process of reaching out to parents or signing up students for the Forest K in the public school? Beth, I don't know if that's a good one for you, but I'll turn it to you and see what you think.
Sure. So prior to COVID, our plans were to have our families come in for a day, our pre-K families, as well as all of our families enrolling in kindergarten that aren't already present in our building, and just explaining what Forest Kindergarten is like, letting them do a tour of our base camps, doing a question and answer session with both of our amazing Forest kindergarten teachers. Last year we did something similar, but I wanted to go a little bit more in depth this year. That did not take place because of the school closure. So I created a form with just a brief explanation of our Forest kindergarten classes, as well as the traditional kindergarten classes that we offer here. And just kind of gave them the opportunity to ask questions if they wanted to, and that we take every effort to place our students in the learning environment that best meets their needs. We always, as Mr. Rain said before, our Forest classes are already full at this point. Just about, we always have families wanting in those classes and a waiting list. So that's not an issue, but we just create a form where they let us know their preference for their child and why that they think their child would excel in the Forest versus the traditional setting.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to actually go back to David for a kind of a suite of questions that I'm getting right now, which is allergies, chemicals in the bug spray, children who have asthma. What have you seen from the research side and from a national perspective of how people deal with these variety of issues?
Yeah, I haven't encountered any asthma problems in all the teachers that I've been working with. I don't think. There's always going to be there's always allergy problems, but I don't think that I don't think that the allergy issue is that much greater indoors versus outdoors, except during really heavy allergen periods. But that hasn't seemed to be a problem. The chemical sensitivity thing is something worth being concerned about. I always say with bug spray, if you're using bug spray, to put it on kids' clothes, but not to put it on kids' skin, and obviously to avoid inhaling it. But again, it's more a question of getting kids acclimated to, especially if they tend to be more indoorsy kids, getting kids acclimated to being outdoors and doing that in incremental steps if there's a problem with that. I was talking to a teacher just the other day who said she had a kid who said, I don't do outdoors, right? And within about 3 or 4 weeks of doing outdoors 1 day a week, she was completely into it. So the health problems haven't been a major obstacle, really. I'd be interested to hear from the kindergarten teachers about on that same question.
Yeah, and actually, along those lines, I want to turn it over, I guess, back to Matt as one of the first to do this. One question that we didn't address that I think is fairly basic that I want to pose to you is, where do the kids go to the bathroom?
Yeah, so that was a don't ask, don't tell policy at first, but we've got a composting toilet and outhouse that Charity's husband actually built, and I've seen some questions on the funding. A lot of it was fundraising, going to businesses. At the time, Cabela's donated all the rain gear and cold weather gear, and then with the composting toilet, I think we actually did like an online campaign. Charity led that. We had minimal expenses. I mean, very minimal expenses. We've really spent no more than another class, and FT funding wise, it pulls more money and more enrollment than any class in the school, because it really is driven growth in the school overall. Bathroom obviously is an issue. Cold weather is an issue, but they're not as big as you think they are. And when you talk about property, I saw some people asking about that. It kind of all started because when I learned about STEM, and I was always into it, but it was always a lab that some company came in and bought for you, and you did STEM in that room, and that's the only place that STEM happened. And so we were about 90% free and reduced lunch, and we had nothing around us, and you're like, well, I don't think anybody's going to buy me a new lab. So as we started looking at resources, we saw that one resource we had was land. And so the Gilbert family that donated the property for the school still owned the surrounding property. And so we talked to them, and they thought it was just nature walks. And gradually they've learned that it's a lot more than that. And they've even offered, in the past, to donate more property just to ensure that the Forest Kindergarten and the Forest School classes continue. So those are just as I was reading through questions, those were a few points that I thought might be helpful.
Thanks, Matt. One question I think I've got all of our local educators on the screen. Here is one that came in about, do parents or teachers ever express concerns with children losing seat time and falling behind academically?
Well, that was my big concern. I'm sure it was Damon's big concern. I don't want to speak for everybody else, and they're much more involved in it today than I am. But we really looked at it with Gene, running some evaluations to make sure that our kids were not falling behind. And I expected that they might fall behind, but socially it would make up for it. But realistically, they were actually slightly ahead of their peers at the end of the year. In year one, it's gotten harder and harder to measure that, because the most involved families are the ones that want to be involved in Forest Kindergarten. But in year one, I feel like it was a very good measure. There's not a lot of preference for or against Forest Kindergarten, and so half the families kind of chose it and half didn't. And I think it was a great thing that they ended up on par, slightly ahead of their peers.
I think one component as well, a lot of talking about test scores. That's not the driving force behind why we're doing what we're doing. We found that when you engage students and you keep them actively engaged, they want to be at school, and you begin to see that data climb on its own. So we try to eliminate as many conversations about test scores. We don't think about it. Obviously, we have to think about accountability, and we do, but that's not the leading part of our conversation. It's more about what are we teaching, what are our kids getting, how are they applying that, and how engaged are they during the course of the day. So if you have them 6.5 hours, whether that's in a Forest Kindergarten or a regular kindergarten, how are they being engaged so that learning begins to evolve on its own, and we begin to see positive results once they hit those benchmark years.
That makes sense. One thing I'll add to, the research isn't out yet, but Dr. Jean Lamina, who is on with us, and one of her colleagues worked on a study and actually followed the Forest Kindergartners through to first and I think into second grade. So we'll come back to her on that one. But one other good question that we had was about whether parents tend to want to take the kids back out of the program as it gets colder. And of course, we're in the South here. We're in Chattanooga, Tennessee, so it doesn't actually get too cold, but people aren't very used to the cold. So I wonder, to the teachers in the group here, is that something that you have seen?
Yes, we have seen parents that are concerned about the cold weather, and we make sure that all of our gear that, during that cold season, our gear is great. The children have it on when they go out. We've got boots and gloves. And also it's about acclimating the children to change their mindset from a negative connotation of it's cold, I want to go inside, to okay, it's cold, but it's refreshing. It feels good. You are okay. So it's really the teachers, and I know Charity can agree with this, in leading a positive perspective of that environmental change. Even when at home, the parents might say it's raining, that we don't need to be wet. So really just getting that positivity going about how good it really is for you to be outside in those moments.
Yes, and they may start off having that attitude of, but once, it's cold or it's too wet and they don't want to play in the rain, or it's too hot even. So we educate them how to find a shade and get into the shade if it's too hot, and to cool themselves down with water. And then also in the cold weather to layer up. And then we also find kids taking those layers off at 30 degrees out. Sorry, at 30 degrees outside, because they're used to how their body feels in that temperature. They become used to that. Like Rebecca said, they're acclimated with the weather. So not everyone takes their coat off. But if they're out running around, it's better to not sweat in the cold weather, because then you will get cold and sick. So parents, I haven't seen any really complain. They send in extra socks and extra jackets for them to put on too.
So I have a great comment here from Kathy Ballman. There's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothes. I actually came out of the outdoor industry, and we always said that. Of course, it is a funding issue again, and there are a lot of access and equity issues in this area. But there are some great outdoor retailers doing work to try to get some of these clothes out on the kids. And we've actually applied for a couple grants to build up kind of a library of clothes, because we have to deal with issues of sanitization and washing them and all of that. But it is an issue, and it's something that we try to address. Shifting gears a little bit, but similar to the allergy question, we're in an area, and of course, Chattanooga is very well known for being having the worst air quality in the country at one point, and then turning that around. But we still do have some air quality issues periodically. So Lana says that state licensing rules require pre-K to stay indoors based on the air quality index. And I'm wondering if you guys know, in terms of that allergy index, are there licensing rules in the state? Have you dealt with any issues about air quality days, or have you had to monitor that down there in Georgia? This is probably a good one, Matt or Damon.
I think we definitely monitor not just air quality, but weather in general, and we make recommendations. I don't know of any licensing pieces that state that we have to adhere to a certain number, or I think it's just the general idea of knowing what's out there and what potentially is going to be harmful for our students, and then utilizing some common sense based on what's going on around us. And we have periods of times or seasons when certain allergens are extremely high. Pollen count gets extremely high in the Chattanooga and surrounding area. And we're a rural community, a rural district. So we have a lot of agriculture, a lot of farmland, a lot of trees around us. And so we definitely are watching that on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, and pay particularly closer attention, I guess, during those seasons. But I'm not aware of anything that states we have to fall within a certain range or report back on that.
I would say you'd have less complaints and less issues out of the forced classes than any other classes in the district. I mean, you'll have more complaints about kids going out on the playground for 30 minutes than you will the fact that these kids are spending half their day outside. Mm-hmm.
That's great. One more question for the teachers in the group. We have a question of, have you seen children grow in their resilience over the course of the school year? And do you have does somebody have a good specific story? I see some smiles out there. Rebecca, you want to start?
Absolutely. The beginning of the year, and I know Charity can attest to this too, there's not just one story, but there are multiple. Like David so adequately put, the the physical development of gross motor in children is just astounding. And we see it every year. Children go from, running and there's roots on the ground and there's a lot of falls, at the beginning of the year. And they're looking to you for trust of, am I okay? So I know both me and Burnett cheer them on and say, whoa, that was a great fall, awesome job. And that same kind of positive energy of, man, you just took a tumble and you're okay, you're not hurt. So then we see as the year progresses, the fewer falls, less frequent mishaps. And we do teach a lot of risk analysis too, of self-regulation. If I'm uncomfortable with this and I'm climbing a tree and I think I'm going to fall and get hurt, I'm going to move back down. And so they're able to regulate their own bodies, which is something that needs to be taught incredibly. I do have a student in particular, she had some neurological issues coming into Forest, and a lot of gross motor skills were not defined. And she, throughout the year, just blossomed. And so you're building up those muscles, you're building up the muscle memory to be able to run down a hill, move your foot a certain way, not fall. So it's necessary, and the perseverance and the resilience in children throughout the year is it's amazing.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. And thank you to all of our panelists and David for being online with us today. Quick point of order, if it's live for you right now, it's 11:30. If anybody needs to drop, feel free to do that. We are going to keep going because there aren't any rules anymore. And this will be recorded later. So if you want to come back, follow Reflection Writing YouTube channel as well as Facebook. It will be saved on there, and then we'll shoot out an email as well with this. We're going to include this recording on our Thursday email. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining. And I'm just going to keep bringing up a couple more questions, and then I'm going to give Corey a few minutes, too, to talk a little bit about one of the really interesting programs that we have that as soon as we're able, we're going to get back to. And actually, Carl Swafford had a really good question here, which is if there's a way to share contact information. The best way to do that probably would be to shoot an email. You can actually email us, and Corey can serve as the kind of conduit for this. His email is Corey, Corey, @reflectionwriting.org. And as I always say, it's riding like riding a bike. Thank you, Courtney. Here's one. Monty from the master's degree in outdoor education, which I'm assuming is from Southern, said that he had trouble with the certification office not recognizing the degrees. I'm going to actually pose that to Jean, because Jean has been following this this whole movement for so long. Jean, what are you seeing kind of at the national level with certifications? Right.
Well, I don't think we at this point have a central way of dealing with certification. So all of us that are in the private training programs are kind of developing our own certification. I know maybe David probably could speak better to this than I can. As far as Antioch, I know has a certification program. So that is through a university. And I'm training in partnership with Southern Adventist University, their master's in outdoor education program as well. So when the teachers take courses through me, through Southern, then of course they're getting academic credit for it. So I think I'm gonna let David give his perspective on this too.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can give a really good response to that because it varies so much from state to state. With all the folks that we're training here, we're providing a nature-based early childhood certificate. It's usually embedded within a larger master's degree. So it really hasn't been an issue with certification folks in New Hampshire, where I've got the most experience. Another aspect of this certification question is that I've seen in some of the questions is the whole concern about what's allowed, what can kids do outside, what's allowed, what are certification officers, especially people that go and evaluate early childhood programs, do. And it's worth knowing that there's recent legislation in Washington state to independently certify outdoor-based or programs or outdoor preschools with a separate set of guidelines than the conventional guidelines that are used for indoor early childhood licensing. So there's a model of coming up with appropriate guidelines for this kind of program. So that's more about program certification than individual certification. So, but it hasn't been an issue in terms of the states in northern New England approving of this kind of coursework as part of teacher certification.
Thanks, David. I want to actually turn it over now to Corey. Corey, tell us a little bit about what is going on right here in Chattanooga.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this afternoon, I guess this morning. There's some really neat things happening in the Chattanooga area. And one of those things is we're working on forming a partnership between a high school and Tyner Academy and an elementary school in Bestie Shepherd. Both of these schools are very diverse in their student bodies. They have about 30% African American, 30% Caucasian, 30% Hispanic. So very diverse schools, but they're literally right across the street from one another. And I approached the Future Ready Institute of Teaching and Learning at Tyner Academy about potentially working with the Bestie Shepherd Kindergarten. And so what Dr. Lamino and I have been doing is working on training the Tyner Future Ready Learning Institute of Teaching students on how to run a forest kindergarten program. And then those students, as a part of their curriculum, will actually be leading the group from Bestie Shepherd on our public site at Reflection Writing. Lyndhurst Foundation funding this public site for us has actually, we've been able to get 2 schools to come out so far, and we have several other schools that are interested in starting to come out. So it's really going to be a benefit for the community, and we're extremely excited about seeing the growth and providing models of what can happen in the greater Chattanooga area.
You're muted.
Mark, you're muted.
Of course, somebody has to do it, so it might as well be me trying to talk while I'm on mute. Thank you, Corey. Gene, I really appreciate you putting this panel together. Matt, Beth, Damon, Rebecca, Charity, I think I got everybody. Thanks so much for joining. We're actually going to close with David. And David, again, thank you from all of us so much for taking this time to be with us. And you're muted this time.
All right, I'm going to do an ending chant, kind of goes along with the beginning. I'm going to get it on the screen, maybe. Hold on for a second. Sorry, I wasn't quite ready for this. We'll end with this chant, and it gets at some nice chant. Is it on the screen, Mark?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And I'll say it through once, and then maybe I'll do it once again, and then maybe you can kind of do it at home on by yourself. But it's great as part of what I think it was Charity was saying about getting kids, turning around the attitude of kids towards being outside in weather that's not necessarily the nicest weather. So it's this kind of chant that you include in your programming. And it goes, whether the weather is cold or whether the weather is hot, whether the weather is nice or whether the weather is not. We'll weather the weather, whatever the weather, whether we like it or not. And you can do this with a nice kind of hand clapping rhythm where you go from your clapping your hands to clapping your knees. And so so it's good, whether the weather is cold or whether the weather is hot. That's how it goes. So let's try it on your own, starting off with slapping your knees and then slapping your hands. And it goes like this. Whether the weather is cold or whether the weather is hot, whether the weather is nice or whether the weather is not, we'll weather the weather, whatever the weather, whether we like it or not.
That's great. I think that is a very fitting way to end, David. Thank you so much. Again, to all the panelists, thank you for coming. If you found this useful, please follow our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook. Thank you to the Lyndhurst Foundation for making this possible. If you want to see more of this type of thing, please become a member, reflectionwriting.org. If you're local in Chattanooga, we also have an online plant sale, so you can plant native plants and restore the habitat in your own backyard. Thank you so much, everybody.
One quick thing. Angel Williams posted that she's at Rossville Elementary in Walker County and would love more guidance on starting a forest kindergarten there. If anyone is interested in starting a forest kindergarten, Dr. Jean Lamino and I would be happy to meet with you and look at your site and give you some guidance on what you might be able to do. Please reach out to me at Corey, Corey, at reflectionwriting.org. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, David.
Thanks.